Hello and welcome to Sunday Song and Rumination Radio. I am your host, Alana Lewandowski. Last week, when I went to do my last post for all of my patrons, I was going to do a video and a performance and share some music, and then also do my Sunday song, which goes out to everybody. I was rendered speechless and attempted a few times to do the video, and none of it felt right, and I knew I needed to go deep and put my ear to the heart, the sorrowing heart of the earth, and spend time holding space for the realization that needed to happen across this land, and there will be more as well. That what occurred, the atrocities that occurred at residential schools across Canada and the United States, I'm sure Australia and other parts of the world, all throughout South America, the islands, Jamaica, Haiti, so many places around the world where colonization struck hard and fast and violently, that I needed to hold space, because up here in the north on Turtle Island, 215 children were discovered in a mass grave outside of Kamloops, British Columbia residential school. And I was just I wasn't shocked that this was discovered, that I knew that conditions were horrific and that the abuse was horrific. But when the truth comes to the surface, and these children came to us to tell us the truth, it always disturbs, and it brings up what is always below the surface, bubbling. And so I let it disturb me, and I grieved, and I sorrowed, and I held space for the grief of Indigenous peoples across this land. And they are still grieving, because they know there will be more. And they know that as the truth comes out, that the re-traumatization comes up, because there are still living survivors and people who were raised by these survivors, and they had so much trauma to deal with and so much pain. And so today, I'm going to talk about two things that have been sort of these threads that have been coming up for me, and actually maybe three threads. So one is that this was a Catholic residential school. Over 70% of the residential schools were Catholic run. So many of the churches, the Anglican Church, Presbyterian, I know in the United States, Seventh-day Adventists, there were Mennonites involved. Many different denominations played mercenary to the government for this, at the very least, cultural genocide. And that being said about cultural genocide, I just want to point out that the way this colonization was designed and the way our laws were built from the root up to today are really was basically these two options. One, cultural genocide must be performed and assimilation must succeed, or the way these laws are created is to suppress Indigenous sovereignty and perform actual genocide. And it's built right into all of the laws, and right across the board. It's just period. That's what it is. It's you either culturally assimilate, and therefore we get to perform cultural genocide, or there will be genocide in the form of grocers cooperating with the government to withhold food rations, in the form of farm equipment dealers not being allowed to sell farm equipment to indigenous people, in the form of all conservation across this country being responsible for burning out villages, and wardens not allowing sacred hunting rights. It just goes on and on and on and on. And so it's very, very important, deeply important, to mark that the church, and in particular the Catholic Church, with as many residential schools as they ran, is deeply complicit in the violence and the abuse that happened at these schools, and in the overall participation of assimilation and cultural genocide as that option of, you either do this, or if you don't cooperate, you will starve, you are corralled. There were pass and permit. I mean, I'll put it this way: apartheid in South Africa designed itself after the Canadian reservation system, and so we have this sheen that we put forth to the world, but we have this underbelly of great suffering and violence. Our history of violence is clearly there. Now, I want to say that I think there's a danger as well in simply demonizing the religiously Catholic. So the little old lady with her rosary that goes to mass, and all the people around the world who participate religiously and have encountered the mystical Christ through these iterations of spiritual practice, of ceremony. I think there's a danger in simply demonizing a Catholic person, someone who has encountered the divine in that way. And I certainly have. I am not a baptized Catholic, but some of my favorite mystical minds ever to walk this planet have been mystical Catholic Christic humans, and that's not to say I haven't been inspired by many other mystics and indigenous spiritual people, but I think there's a danger in pointing out, like the little old lady that's going and praying to her saints and saying that she's the reason why all of this exists and why all of this has happened. And the reason why there's a danger there is because of the Doctrine of Discovery. The entire Western world, every institution that exists, rests on the Doctrine of Discovery. So even if you have renounced your Catholicism from your childhood, or if you've never been a part of it, if you are atheist, if you're agnostic, if you have sought solace in Buddhism, and doesn't that spiritual realm that we're a part of is one thing, where we're seekers. Like I am, I'm a forever seeker, a lifelong learner, always looking for where the depth is, and so the one thing I would say about that is, it's one thing to be searching for depth and to hear something profound from someone attached to an institution, but I will say that basically the entire Western world, the industrialized world, every institution rests on the Doctrine of Discovery, and its power rests on that, and So if that is the case, then no matter what your spirituality expression is, you are in some sense politically Catholic. So I wanted to say that, not to defend the behaviors of these people who obviously had extreme issues to be finding their calling at these schools and performing such horrific, heinous abuse. And that is not to excuse those people at all. But I also find that when we just simply point out the Catholics, for instance, that means that I'm pointing out a dear friend who grew up Catholic and still finds as his mystical encounters through that modality, but is also gay and very broad in his way of seeing the world, and that's just one example. So I wanted to point that out, that we can, if we're affiliated with a denomination that didn't participate in this, we can pat ourselves on the back, but the reality is that everybody, no matter who they are, has participated if they have immigrated into this story. And I'm talking about settlers. Even though we like to call ourselves settlers, we were desperate, traumatized immigrants who came here and happened to have the right hue of skin and happened to be able to get rid of our accents and be given a plot of land, and suddenly we had the toehold over and above people who knew this land and the stories that this land tells for thousands upon thousands of years. So that was one thing I wanted to say is be careful if you're pointing fingers simply at a Catholic person, because this story is way deeper than that. And I actually, at the risk of sounding like just merely a conspiracy theorist, I think the reason why we have not heard a public apology for this is because it would open up the can of worms for the Pope to spend the rest of his days apologizing to every single colonized spot across the Western Hemisphere and part of the Eastern Hemisphere, and that's not to say it shouldn't happen, but we are all resting, even though the church and state is separate. If you have an income, if you are a part of an institution, it is resting on the doctrine of discovery. And so I just wanted to point that out. We are complicit, and we have immense amounts of work to do to decolonize our creative capacity for something different than exists. And then that also leads me to a thought I've had about what's Jesus doing lakeside at the Sea of Galilee that's been renamed by the colonizer. Now think about all the renaming that took place. So we never had to be reminded of who was removed. And then think of how this is named after Caesar Tiberius, and this lake, this Sea of Galilee, and how Jesus performs this abundant fish miracle till the nets are busting. And he says, basically he's saying that this does not belong to Caesar. This will not be mediated between, Caesar will not mediate between me and this precious divine earth and my earth formed body and the Creator. And so I've always thought of when Jesus says metanoia, like how it's defined as repent. People think of repent as repent of your individual sins or whatever, but many scholars, including Cynthia Bourgeault and others, say that the nuanced interpretation of metanoia is to move into the larger mind, or move beyond the small mind. So imagine when Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and he flips the coin out, and he's basically saying the stamp on this mind piece of metal, this mind nickel or whatever, gold or whatever it was, bronze, the stamp belongs to Caesar. That's it. And this will not, when he performs these miracles of abundance, he is saying that will not mediate between me and Creator, between this earth that where when it is in a biodynamic balance, 1 + 1 = countless. And so I've thought about this metanoia so much in the more levels of consciousness. But what if you incarnate that level of consciousness into his political subversion? And suddenly there's this whole new light that shows up, especially because I have been learning from a friend more recently about indigenous sovereignty and the power that it holds. And have you ever asked why colonization has taken the look that it has? And part of it is that indigenous people, when they are in their signatory power under international law, hold immense amounts of environmental power. They hold great power and great sovereignty, with nothing separating them between themselves and Creator. And so I've kind of put those two together, this level of consciousness that Jesus is talking about when he says move into the larger mind. But then what if that level of consciousness is actually incarnating what it means to walk as a sovereign human, with nothing mediating between you and Creator? So it might sound kind of like hyper Protestant. It's not really what I mean. It goes deeper than that. But ask yourself this week why indigenous people have been so persecuted, and why there has been so much effort put into their assimilation. And the part of the answer is that if they stand in their sovereign power and are not assimilated, they hold an immense amount of spiritual power as well. So just some thoughts about where we're at when it comes to I think what we're going to be seeing over the next decade, and how we can align with that, because somewhere along the line you weren't born as a corporate number either. And when Jesus says the kingdom is at hand, what if that's part of what he was talking about? So I'm going to play my little chant. Move into the larger mind, for the kingdom is at hand. Move into the larger mind, for the kingdom is at hand. Awaken, oh my heart, awaken, oh my heart, so I can move into that larger mind, for the kingdom is at hand. Move beyond your small mind, for the kingdom is at hand. Move beyond your small mind, for the kingdom is at hand. Awaken, oh my heart, Awaken, oh my heart, so I can move beyond my small mind. For the kingdom is at hand. Move into the larger mind. For the kingdom is at hand. Move into the larger mind. For the kingdom is at hand. Awaken, oh my heart. Awaken, oh my heart, so I can move into that larger mind. For the kingdom is at hand. I'll just say one more thing. This was made by a Peruvian indigenous man, and I want to just say a special prayer for Peru today as they go through their next stage of their elections. It is a very sad time for many people in Peru, how much division and polarization there is. And I don't know all the details, but I do know that I can feel it. And particularly I feel the indigenous people there, and I feel their power, and I hold it up and in my heart. Amen.